And thank you all for being here. If there's anyone who is missing this meeting, it is going to be recorded, so we will definitely be able to send that out. So if your plans change and you need to head out, then know that you can still have that information in the future. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to get started.
All right, thank you, Bambi. Welcome everyone to this meeting. We want to begin by just doing the land acknowledgement. First opening by recognizing that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. It's important to emphasize that we cannot work to fulfill our mission and our vision of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge and recognize the true history and cost of colonization. And acknowledgement is just only the first step. And I go further in acknowledging that we live in a nation where the wealth that has been created was created by subjugation and exploitation of African people through the chattel slavery. We also know to uplift the original stewards of this land, the Duwamish people, as I began earlier, and recognize that the liberation of both the Black groups as well as the Indigenous groups is intertwined. And their liberation is a liberation of all. It's lifting up those who are most disproportionately impacted to get us to a more effective place. And with that, we will pivot over to some announcements that we would like to begin with, starting off with celebrating the Housing Washington event where the Black Home Initiative was given a Racial Equity Award. I know many of you were at Housing Washington and the core team members were up there to receive the award, but want to celebrate the great work that you've all contributed as a network. A special thank you to Civic Commons as a convening partner who has been driving this work. So special thank you to Mari, who I know is often behind the scenes, stewarding this work and cultivating partnerships across the board. And many of you who've leaned in to make this work more effectively possible. So a special shout out to the many leaders who've stepped up in ways never seen before to get this work forward. I know Bambi will be doing some additional announcements here, but I also want to proactively plug that as a continuation of the celebration of the big win we had at the state level for the Covenant Homeownership account. On November 2nd, we'll be coming together as a community in conversation with Richard and Leah Rothstein to talk about just action. If you have not seen Leah Rothstein's article recently, she actually talks about the Covenant Homeownership account as an example of the work that is necessary to be done. So we are getting that work done. We're getting the strategies that are in that book already implemented. And the big question in coming together as a community will be, how do we amplify this? Because we know it's not just one policy. It's going to take many more tools for us to be effective in making a dent on systemic inequities, especially on home ownership. So with that said, I want, before we get into the details of announcements, to also acknowledge where we are in terms of process for this work. We have a homeownership policy framework that we developed last year that we are revamping this year and making sure that we have an updated version for 2024 with clear priorities. And we have significant opportunities to not only have a policy framework as a point of reference, but get the policies and programs that we include in that framework adopted and passed. And that's the work we're trying to set a foundation for now. We will have a robust conversation today with Representative April Berg, who is coming back here to talk about the real estate surcharge transfer, which is a rebrand of an effort that we have been working on. And Chad Vaculin on the HDC team will be here to back up and provide details on that bill. And then we do have Assessor Wilson here to talk about some of his persistent efforts really in trying to get homeownership exemptions to pass. And I know he's done a lot of coalition building work, a lot of conversations at the state level, and we're looking forward to hearing where those are. And then we'll get an update on the CHA program itself here in terms of the study that is underway, which is critical for us to elevate, especially in thinking about implementation of the Covenant Homeownership Account Bill. And then we'll close off, of course, with the housing levy, which is marching towards the finish line on November 7th. Just a reminder for all of you to remind your neighbors to vote yes on Prop 1, and Chad will be here with details on how we're supporting organizations in getting involved on that. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Bambi, to take us through your announcements and facilitate the conversation.
You bet. Thank you so much, Patience. And one of the first announcements is we're all noticing we're here in the morning, and we typically have been an afternoon meeting group. So again, we will be recording this for anyone who needed to miss this time. We did change the schedule to accommodate the conference last week at Housing Washington. Our future meetings at this point, we have the November 1st. We're going to go back to our afternoon time slot at 1 p.m. And then I have added, and will be adding into your calendars today, you'll see it pop up, a November 8 additional meeting. We have speakers who want to speak to us about things that we should be considering to be in the Homeownership Policy Framework, and we don't have enough time to get them all in just on the November 1st meeting. So we will be adding a November 8 meeting, and we'll be back here in the morning at 10 a.m. And then just a reminder on your calendar, the BHI Policy Summit, we are organizing for that now. It'll be December 13th, and that will be a 10 a.m. meeting. It will be virtual. You'll receive an invitation to that. And then as Patience had mentioned, we're going to be having that Covenant Homeownership Account celebration and the book event with Leah and Richard Rothstein. We hope that you will all make sure to get your tickets. There was a link to the tickets in the agenda. You can also find that in the events at the HDC website. That first hour is going to be that conversation, and the second hour will just be a straight out celebration. We didn't have the opportunity in the spring, and we really want to make sure we're taking the time to do so. So please do sign up for your ticket. The event is free thanks to our sponsors. And then in terms of the network policy digest and action alerts, those are happening every Friday. If you aren't signed up, please make sure that you do, and then share that far and wide. We want to grow that. This group is around 200 people who have signed up into this particular, appointment time every month. But that sign up digest is around 400 people. And, we really want to grow that, make sure that people are understanding what we're doing in our efforts. And then always please reach out to me if you have any questions. And if you need to send me any updates, information for the Policy Digest, let me know what's happening in your world as we continue to connect with one another over the work that we're doing. We really get a sense of understanding how we are growing this effort and really making that change. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. I believe what we're going to do, welcome Representative Berg. And we have Chad here as well from HDC. I believe Chad's going to just contextualize for a moment the Affordable Homes Act, and then we're going to hear from Representative Berg.
Thank you, Bambi. Just trying to get my shared screen here. All right, there we go. So thanks for giving me a time to chat today. It's good to see you all. My name is Chad Vaculin, the Advocacy Mobilization Manager here at HDC. And as you know, we ran a bill last year known as the Affordable Homes Act bill. And, although we didn't really, this bill didn't make it over the finish line, thanks to many of you, as well as others that we partnered with throughout the session. We really were able to demonstrate to lawmakers great importance that there is in raising revenue for affordable housing and affordable home ownership in particular. So last year, we created a broad, diverse group of supporters and are, building on that foundation to support a new and renewed bill coming back this section with a bold task to invest in housing. So just as a quick reminder, the funding focus within the policy framework that Patience alluded to at the beginning, it's one of the important aspects of the overall BHI policy framework. The funding bucket of BHI policy framework aims to expand grants that finance affordable home construction to create sustainable home ownership opportunities. And, among other funding areas that are also within the framework, a specific tactic within this area is to increase the state housing trust fund and to establish a permanent funding source to the housing trust fund. This is this bill that known last year's Affordable Homes Act is really one way to target both of these goals, these tactics. So how does Affordable Homes Act, or what was known as the Affordable Homes Act, support Black homeownership? So, the Housing Trust Fund provides funding that assists home buyers through things like down payment assistance programs and capital funding for affordable home ownership projects. So getting a dedicated funding source for the HTF has, up until this point been elusive. So this bill has a potential to make a big step forward in this area. And a dedicated funding source is, has been described, has been identified as an important aspect of the BHI policy framework and as a top priority within that funding bucket. So there's really, this last year has been, and leading up to this year, there's been substantial support within the legislature, and many legislators themselves have identified this bill as really a high priority during the upcoming session. And we're really fortunate to have one of those champions with us today. So Representative April Berg, last year worked tirelessly behind the scenes to really get this bill to progress forward, move mountains behind the scenes. And we're really appreciative of all the efforts that were put in last year. And, looking forward to this year, Representative Berg will be the prime sponsor in the House. So without any further ado, I'd like to kind of turn it over to her to speak to us on this upcoming and exciting bill.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chad. And can everybody hear me okay? Okay, awesome. So great to see everybody. I feel like it's kind of like homegoing week or homecoming week, because there's so many faces that I got to see in Olympia last year, helping with the Affordable Homes Act to get it really close to over the finish line. So Chad gave a great overview of where we are. The only correction I'm going to make right now is the name. So it is going to be the Real Estate Transfer Surcharge. And so I just want to unpack that a little bit with folks on this call, because it's a big deal to change the name. And there was a lot of thoughtful consideration. First, people don't know what REIT is. It's an acronym. And the crux of the acronym, the reason why this tax is actually legal is because it's an excise tax. And we know that that is actually the legal way for us to get progressive tax reform done in our state is through excise taxes. So people don't know what excise tax is. I've had many folks come to me and say, oh, it's a property tax, and oh, it's this, it's that. So what's an excise tax? Well, it's really a tax on the transfer of something, right? And in this case, it's property. So we decided to just unpack that word and say it is a real estate transfer. And we're not even going to say tax, we're going to say surcharge. So surcharge, I think, is a little more indicative of what it is. We are talking about homes valued over $3 million. And for only those homes, this surcharge will apply. And so I will kind of work backwards into the thinking and how we get to the same math that will allow us to have a dedicated revenue funding source for homes. So this surcharge will only be on homes over $3 million. It's in addition to our progressive REIT. So if you remember last year, we had that 4th or 5th tier, depending on what version of the bill you were looking at. And that was about a 0.5% increase on the highest end. And I shouldn't even say homes, properties. We're really talking about all properties. So instead of that, we're looking at a full 1%. Now, what we're going to do on the back end of the bill or the front end, depending on how you think of it, there's going to be 2 parts. One, we're going to amend the current progressive REIT. And when I say amend, we're going to take that 525 starting point and push that up to $1 million. So you will see homes that are worth under 3 million. When you transfer ownership, you will actually see a decrease from what you're paying right now in excise taxes. And the reason you will see that decrease, and the reason why we can still have dedicated funding for affordable housing, is because we're going to have the real estate surcharge. The transfer surcharge will be backfilling onto what that progressive REIT will now be giving back to the lower end homes or the properties that aren't worth 3 million. But we'll also be able to peel off dedicated revenue for about 5 buckets. And that is our housing trust fund, our Apple Health and Homes, our IDD, our supportive housing. And then we also added farm worker housing, which again, near the end of session, that was a bucket we added, but we're going to make that from the beginning a part of the plan for this new Affordable Homes Act. So think of it as 2 steps. One, we are taking the progressive REIT, raising that initial threshold to $1 million. And then the second step is adding a real estate transfer surcharge. So hopefully that was as clear as mud. But the goal right now is to really try and talk through this with advocates and allies like yourselves to get the language right. I continue to say homes, and I should say properties. We will be running this as a full property bill, so there won't be any exemptions or carve-outs. Who knows, once we start baking this bill with my colleagues in terms of going through the committee process and going through both chambers, we might see some differences, but our commitment is to get to that approximately $200 million for dedicated revenue for affordable homes in all of those categories. And so I see a question, and yes, so the DOR has run the numbers and the numbers work. And so what we're doing now, we should have a bill draft and final numbers right near the end of this month. But the numbers do work to get us what we need to backfill on the current REIT obligations, as well as put money aside for dedicated funding for affordable housing. Any other questions?
So any estimate as to what you would get net above backfilling?
So we're really still trying to hit that 200 million a year goal. Yes. And so, that will sound familiar from the last bill. So that's 400 a biennium. And so the challenge that we're having, so the last Economic Revenue and Forecast Council meeting, REIT is still down. So that's one of the challenges that we're having. We're working real time with numbers that are going down for a variety of reasons. What I really want folks to focus on is that even though, and I believe the last percentage was much like the previous one, spread around down about 31%. But what I want to focus on is that there is still money available in REIT. So just because it's not as much, just because the market is doing different things, it does not mean that we should not look at this as a progressive revenue source to fund housing. It simply means that, to your point, Peter, we're going to have to adjust numbers and expectations based on market. But when you look at this bill and the way it's written, with REIT where we were probably a year ago, I think, well, I shouldn't even say a year, probably 6 months ago, it was coming at right around 200 million. And so, yeah, a couple questions in the chat. So, good question. This will be a completely different bill. Because if you remember last year's bill, it kind of worked in tiers and it worked within the current REIT structure. So this new bill is going to amend the current REIT structure simply to get us up to that $1 million mark. And then add another section to that part of policy that talks about the real estate transfer surcharge. So it'll be a whole different bill.
Thank you.
And yeah, and Anne's question about the data. So we are breaking it out by county and how it'll affect certain counties. So that'll get us to those numbers of how many properties are in that 3 million. And frankly, you know, we are looking at multifamily and a lot of commercial properties as well as single family ownership. And so the reason why we're breaking it out by county is just to make the, I don't want to say argument, but just make the point to my colleagues that it is going to hit differently. And there are some counties that simply don't have single family residences or a lot of properties that are in this category. And Cliff, will this fund construction, preservation, or so it'll fund the buckets. And so trying to think of the best way to say it, I am not diving, this is not going to go through housing. So what we're doing is we're funding the buckets of housing trust fund. So what that currently funds, they are going to get additional resources. For the supportive housing, they are going to get additional resources, but we are not. The goal with this bill, and actually I'll also say this brings up another good point. The way I'm going to file this bill, it is not going to have a local option. This bill is a tax cut. With a local option, it gets a little dicey because it's optional for the local. So it potentially could be a tax increase. This is a tax cut for the majority of property owners in our state. And great question. Yes, it will be pre-filed. That is the only way to get this thing rock and rolled. Without the local option, the hope, and I think my understanding is that it'll go straight to finance because it won't have to go through an additional committee. So that gives us, time is going to be the biggest issue that we have with this particular bill next session.
Really exciting. The quick point I will ask that you emphasize, Representative Berg, is the importance of bipartisanship in supporting this bill, given that it's an election year. Could you just speak to some of your thoughts around that and how you're thinking of building this broader coalition to get the bill across the finish line?
Yeah, so thank you, Patience. That's a great question. And honestly, I don't have an answer for that. So I'm just going to, give you a story. So we had a bill a couple sessions ago. I was literally was my baby. I was the only sponsor. I wrung someone's arm to get them to co-sponsor it, just the two of us. So that's fine. It was a bill that was great for Republican districts. We are talking about jobs and all the good things, right? Just construction, increased assessed property value. I could not get one Republican to sign on. And I barely got one, maybe got one to actually vote for it. And it did nothing but good things for Republican districts. I'm telling you this story because I was able to go out to Wenatchee this weekend to visit one of the sites where my bill is being implemented. It's 450 new jobs and an additional $3 billion in assessed value. And I could not get a Republican to co-sponsor or really support this bill. So that is, let me tell you, I was standing in Wenatchee. Did I mention that? So I looked around at all the supporters and the ports and the people and all the people saying, you did great. Oh my gosh, this was amazing. We couldn't have had this growth. We're actually getting Microsoft is paying for water to go to a different part of this small city. They couldn't have had any of that without this bill. And every Republican that represents that area voted against it. So that said, my journey with this bill will to make it across the finish line. I really hope we get bipartisan support. I really hope there is this kumbaya moment around housing, affordable housing, and doing it the right way. But my focus is going to be on the bill and getting it across the finish line, just like my focus was 2 years ago with my other good little bill and getting it across the finish line because I knew it was the right thing for people and for communities, regardless of if particular representatives from other parties did not see it the way I saw it. Those folks in Wenatchee, they were happy. I was happy. That's what mattered.
well, the level of dissonance, right, that exists politically on these issues. But I think the focus on the good little bill is the right approach. The framing on it being a tax reduction for folks with lower incomes in particular, I think will go a long way in an election cycle.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of add to that, the folks on this call, I mean, you know, you are all coming from a very just powerful places, right? And you're having conversations with people who sometimes you don't know what their partisan affiliation is. So I would say the biggest help that you can give to this bill would be to talk to people in community about what it does, the fact that it's a tax cut, and the fact that it's dedicated revenue for affordable housing. I've actually had a conversation with some folks who I know aren't very supportive of it, but when I really emphasize the dedicated funding, something clicked. And I think maybe last session, we were all on a sugar high from, you know, being able to put $400 million into our housing trust fund. Look, that was the best decision we could make. The only decision we can make as a legislature. It was not dedicated revenue. It was a one-time sugar high. And so I think as you're making arguments in communities about what this bill does, that's the differentiating point, right? Like this is dedicated revenue. And even if REIT is going down, so even if we don't hit that target because of market conditions, it does not mean that this bill should not be supported, because what it's going to put in place is a mechanism for dedicated revenue regardless of where you know, how it goes up and down. So maybe emphasizing that point with the folks that you're talking to, that would be great air cover for me, so they're hearing it from multiple sources.
Well, I think you make a good point about how it's going to be spent. It's not just affordable housing. There's ownership. And what does that mean? What does a housing trust fund thinking through more applications than they have in the past, or is the bill going to speak to that?
So no, that's a great point. And we do have the data on their backlog. So that came out late last session, and it was, and I don't want to like misquote the numbers, but there was a very significant backlog of projects, because somebody asked just that question, like, well, what if you do get all this money? There's not, like, do you even have enough projects? So the thing that was emphasized to me was not only is there a backlog, but, oh, and thank you for that, Anna. Yeah, there's a backlog, but there's also no certainty. And, you know, businesses, all good things run on certainty. And without certainty, it's it's impossible to bond, and it's very hard to plan for what's coming next. And so what we gave was, again, that sugar high with no certainty. So there's no, organizations can't go out and bond and make plans and say, hey, this is what we know is coming. So that's what we want to give with this. And so as we're talking to folks, talking about that certainty, yes, there's absolutely a backlog. And then from there, you know, basically, regardless of what those numbers come in, we will have a stream that we can depend on year over year to go towards affordable housing.
Currently, it's a subcommittee of the operations committee.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anna, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative Berg. I am really excited to hear everything that you're talking about. For the record, I am Ann Campbell, the Managing Director for the Homeownership Program, a direct recipient of Housing Trust Fund investments, or distributor, I should say. And I just wanted to really also be enthusiastic about the fact that with a dedicated funding source and even a larger funding resources available to distribute, that means that we can push more aggressively on our attempts to grow emerging organizations, such as permanently affordable housing organizations, CLTs, the Habitat affiliates, et cetera, who are wanting to grow but do not have the financial wherewithal to set their projects up in a way that makes them competitive when you're dealing with a highly competitive funding round and you have other projects that are ready to proceed because those other organizations have the ability to do all of that pre-work, and they have the money to do all of that pre-work. So yeah, this is excellent. And to answer the question in the chat, are those updated numbers? Yes, those are updated numbers. $93.2 million worth of ask for $38.8 million worth of resources. And that's coming in at 48 applications. And 63% of those applications are to very strictly address new construction activities.
Thank you for that, Anne, because those, and I'll reach out to you just because I think just getting some more of those numbers. There was a really good kind of infographic that came out last year. And again, it was really near the end of session. So much happens as you get closer to sine die. And it was great to be able to tell folks, like, here's actually the need and here are the resources, how they're being used right now and how much more we could do. And then Aiden, so that's a good question about the caucuses. So sticking a pin in the GOP support, and again, I hope that comes. I hope we can get this bipartisanly across the finish line. We are looking for a Senate sponsor. I think everybody in this call knows that the Senate's gone through a little bit of reorganization. So it's taken a minute. We wanted to kind of take a beat before we went and said, who's going to do a companion bill? You know, I'm saying openly, we need to have a companion bill on the Senate side. That is the secret to success on this one. So I'm going to be reaching out to some of my colleagues over there to see. I've reached out to a few. I will tell you, I have gotten amazing support, right? Like, absolutely, we need this. By the end of last session, senators, as well as many of my House colleagues, understood the urgency that this is the session for housing. And we frankly did not do enough in that first year. So I believe there is broad-based support. The question is going to be who exactly is going to be that sponsor on the Senate side. And again, I'm having conversations. I think that I'm trying to be very strategic about success because we're on a crunch timeline. So I'll just leave it there. So, but I do, I know, and we need a Senate sponsor. This has to be a two-step. We have to be together as chambers as we move this forward.
Thank you, Representative Berg. And once again, we are ready to partner with you, champion this bill over the finish line. I know it's only 60 days of session next year, so we're all cognizant of the urgency that we are working under here. Could you talk a little bit about the stakeholder engagement that you have planned? You have a meeting coming up in October, just highlighting that and close us off in just the next steps for people to be aware of as we think about supporting you in this work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that patience. And just, well, I guess this right here is great support. So knowing that that we've got a forum of folks who are able to get together and see real time what's going on in this space, that's huge. So our next steps, we've met kind of as a small group, and staff kind of has a go forward in terms of bill drafting. So we're expecting a bill draft in the next week or so, along with updated numbers from DOR, and we'll be having a small stakeholder group meeting in Mill Creek on October 25th. And when I say stakeholders, it's the usual suspects. We've got a lot of outside organizations, as well as a lot of union allies, and then, of course, my colleagues from both the House and the Senate. The familiarity of this group is around progressive tax reform. It's around things like wealth tax. It's around things like cap gains. So this particular bill is a part of that larger conversation as well, in addition to it being a part of the housing conversation. Because I think when we look at our need for affordable housing, it really comes back to we don't have a lot of levers because we don't have progressive taxation in our state. And so that's where we're weaving it in. So there's going to be a whole nother group of allies. There could be some crossover from this call who are looking at it from that point of view of getting our tax code more progressive. And this transfer tax is one way to get there. We just don't have a lot of levers. I think the other piece of it, and this is just my hope, is that as we talk about progressive tax reform, that we're going to have a come together of what's the plan. So I will tell you as a finance chair, revenue needs a reason. And so for me, this new revenue step, the reason is affordable housing. So when we look at revenue opportunities, there's always going to be a reason behind it because people have to know what we're paying for. So there's that piece of it. The other piece is we cannot, there is no I don't want folks to compete against different progressive tax reform options, right? So this should not be competing with wealth, which should not be competing with dialing levers on cap gains or other potential progressive tax reform. So I really want to make sure all the stakeholders who've been doing this work for many moons, it took 10 years to get cap gains over the finish line. That same group, I need to come behind this as well as that next step of progressive tax reform. And of course, we're going to be talking about wealth. We're going to eventually be talking about our property tax structure, homestead exemptions, renters credits, all the things are on the table, but we've got to get this one across the finish line first. And so I'm saying that because I know folks might be like, well, how come we're having this conversation here and this conversation there? Everybody needs to be on the same page, because one thing that did happen last session was this got a little bit pitted against the 1% local levy lid lift for localities. And to me, they were two separate conversations, but they morphed into an either or, and I'm like, we can have all the nice things if we work together. So that piece of working together is going to start at the end of the month here in Mill Creek with some more of our stakeholders. And then what my goal, because Patience, I know you'll be at that meeting and some other folks possibly on this call, then to kind of bring back to the bigger housing conversation where we are with a pre-filed bill.
Well, thank you once again. And as you talk about progressive revenue, I'm just reminded, as I'm sure everyone is here, that we're in a state where we have an upside down tax code and it must change. And we continue to leave revenue at the table because reform has not ensured. So we're really grateful for the work you are doing, the intersectional approach that you are taking it from, and here to help champion this over the finish line. With that, Representative Berg, we will be seeing you very soon. And I am very sure that there will be a significant overlap in the stakeholder engagement. The wealth tax is another priority that this group has been very interested in. In fact, we have Senator Frame joining us at the next meeting to talk about the vision for the wealth tax. So with that, we're going to pivot over, but any last words for you, Representative Berg?
No, just thank you all. It's great to see everyone and hope to see you soon. Have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
With that, Bambi, I'll kick it over to you to transition us to the next topic here.
You bet. So we're kind of on a roll here around progressive taxation. And we have John Wilson, our assessor, here to join us today, talk about the possibility of a 2024 bill. And we know that we had on our framework for 2023, we were hoping to see an anti-displacement bill that happened for property tax. That didn't occur. The bill has been changing. There's been a lot of making sure that the ducks are in a row and that we're ready to really initiate something. So very excited to hear from Assessor Wilson today. Assessor Wilson, let us know if you need any support, but other than that, you're set to go.
Great. Thank you, Bambi. Thank you, Patience. Great to see you, Representative Berg. We're going to be meeting with her actually in just a few days to talk about how to make our property tax system more progressive. Couple of things I want to touch on really quickly. First, in terms of progressivity, something that is a political reality that comes January 1 is the senior exemption program that we have fought so for to improve and reform. The economic threshold of that come January 1 will go up to $84,000 a year in King County. We think that will help thousands more people qualify for that exemption. We're right now working with the county council to get us some additional staffing resources to make sure we can get people processed through that quickly in that. From there, I want to shift to what we can do. We hope to make state property taxes more progressive. And let me share a little informational tidbit with you right now. We've had a tax shift going on in this county and in this state for the better part of the last 10 years. And that shift has been from commercial clients, commercial properties to residential. So here's where it stands today in King County. Right now, we collect $7.2 billion in property taxes. We'll collect a little over $8 billion in this next year. Of that 7.2%, 82.5%, let me repeat that again, 82.5% come from residential property owners. That's single family homes, condos, small apartments, 4 units or less, which means the commercial sector is paying 17.5% of the property tax burden in King County. That's not fair, it's not equitable, and it's not sustainable. And that's why we think it's so timely and so important in order to make our property tax system more progressive and to take some of the burden off of people, that we pursue what we're calling a homeowner exemption. It is in part modeled after the legislation that former Representative Harris Talley proposed a couple of years ago. It was then House Bill 1494, aimed at displacement in that. What we're trying to do here is provide real property tax relief to working families and moderate income homeowners, but also we want to do parallel legislation to help renters and small business with property tax relief. On the homeowner side, what we're looking at is a statewide exemption that would apply only to the state share of the property tax. And it would do a reduction of up to 60% of the median value in each county. So it's indexed much like the senior exemption program to each county. In King County, that median household is about $900,000, a little bit between $850,000 and $900,000 these days. For homes in King County up to about $1.8 million, it would actually be a reduction in property taxes. It would be stair-step. More modest your house, the bigger savings you would get. Over that, you would pay some more. We ran for the heck of it because I'm that kind of guy. Numbers on what 2 of our leading business leaders and multi-billionaires in Medina would pay. And they have homes that are each worth about $150 million. They would pay an additional probably $85,000 to $100,000 a year in property taxes. Whether they'd even know that would be hard to tell. But for working families, it would mean hundreds, if not perhaps $1,000 or more off their property taxes. What we would do, though, and the important difference here is it is a tax shift. A shift to higher end properties, much like what Representative Berg was talking about, and also to larger commercial accounts to rebalance that equation between residential and commercial. We do that for no small part to not gut K-12 education. We want to make sure that whatever we do in terms of property tax relief statewide, it protects fundamental K-12 education. There have been homeowner exemption or homestead bills proposed before, but frankly, generally, they have been aimed at gutting K-12 education. We think that's wrong and not sustainable. The trick with this is it's going to require 2 pieces of legislation. First, it'll require enabling of the actual homeowner exemption. Second, it will require a constitutional amendment, and that will take a 2/3 vote in both chambers of the legislature, the House and the Senate. I listened with interest, and I understand Representative Berg's frustration of trying to find bipartisan support. I am happy to tell you right now, we are starting outreach with legislators, but we have already been talking to assessors across the state. And as you can probably guess, most of my colleagues are Republicans. And in fact, the leading champion along with me for this homeowner exemption is the assessor from Spokane County, Tom Konis. Tom's a Republican, but he's all in on this, and he is willing to work with Republican legislators throughout Eastern Washington. We've also gotten small counties, Okanagan, Yakima, that are historically Republican, that are supporting this idea. We have the Snohomish County assessor on board, the Clark County assessor on board. And what we are doing now, we met recently with senior staff for the House Speaker's office. They're quite interested. We're also conducting discussions with Senate leadership, and we're trying to build together a bipartisan coalition to move this in the legislature in the 24th session. It's a steep hill, no doubt about it. But when you look at the numbers, and Washington is unique in that sense that our tax system on the one hand is so reliant on property taxes, but we have seen after year of double-digit increases on the residential side, that homeowners are paying a disproportionate share of the property tax. It's also that we think now is the time, even in a short session, to put this before the legislature. If the constitutional amendment portion of this passed, and both pieces have to pass, it would then go to the voters on the November 24 ballot. And we think, I've even had some people that are a little bit skeptical of it among my assessor colleagues who have said, if you could get this on the ballot, this thing should pass with virtually little opposition. And that's certainly what we hope to. That's what we're doing on that. Then what we want to do quickly on the two other fronts is for renters, because we know that property taxes are a burden for renters too. We've tried various forms of renter relief, not gotten anywhere. What we want to do is either amend or model after the working families tax credit and provide direct property tax relief to renters, means tested, and that by formulas and that the Department of Revenue is already putting in place to administer the working families tax credit. And then the third element quickly is to help small businesses. And in that case, it's again kind of picking up legislation that has been kicking around in Olympia, but lifting the present personal property tax exemption of $15,000 up to $100,000. That means for a great number of small businesses that would exempt them from that tax. But again, it would be a shift to larger commercial clients. We think all of that will help make our property tax system a little bit more progressive and set the stage to help protect homeowners and let them stay in their homes, but also open the door for additional home ownership and that, because obviously with interest rates where they are, if we can somehow lower that factor that property tax is in people qualifying for mortgages, we hopefully can get more people into home ownership and frankly paying property taxes. So that's what we're up to.
Well, exciting work, Assessor Wilson. I will go right into the non-tax expert brain question here, which is, in looking at the proposal, what I understand is this would be an automated enrollment for the up to 1.8 million homes. And if that is true, folks have asked previously the question of course, it benefits everyone. Was there consideration to make it more targeted? It brings a question for me in terms of constitutionality in doing that. So could you talk us through any feasibility in a targeted approach? And is that a conversation that's been happening in the coalition in terms of considering it becoming just more targeted if we're not able to provide it for everyone else?
Sure. There are a couple things. There is constitutional questions about how much you could actually target it on that. We also know, and this was one of the challenges that we raised with Representative Harris-Talley with her 1494 was, it was both an annual application process, which was a process nightmare for us, and it required people to opt in. And unfortunately, what we've seen from research across the nation is those kind of programs have an inherent implicit bias to them that tend to keep people of color and historically marginalized communities out of the program. So the notion that we approached is we need to determine that you are the owner occupant of the house, but rather than make you go through a cumbersome process. And now what we're looking at now is working with the Department of Revenue to develop sort of 4 or 5 key touch points. Are you listed as the owner of the property? What's your driver's license say? What does your voter registration say? Do you have a utility bill? Those things that give us a high certainty that you actually are the owner occupant of the property. And then have DOR present to each of the 39 counties a pre-screened list of here are the people that we believe using this criteria qualify for the exemption. That would take the burden off of, frankly, my department, also scores and scores of the smaller counties that just don't have the staff to administer something like this, and would make sure that we got everybody in. And then people could appeal to get in if they were rejected, but it would be through the local appeals board, the Board of Equalization, rather than having to file a state appeal. We just think what we're trying to do is make this as efficient as possible and targeted to apply to actual homeowners, not people that own multiple properties. And that, for example, is another advantage of having DOR develop the list, is DOR can do a statewide cross scrub to see that, wait a minute, John Wilson's got a property here in Seattle and John Wilson's got a property. He doesn't, by the way, but John Wilson has a property somewhere else. You get to pick one property to be eligible for the exemption, not multiple ones. And we think that would help us protect a little bit from potential abuse of the program. Does that, Patience, kind of touch on?
It does. Thank you.
Would you talk about, first, I just want to say I love the automatic enrollment partnership with DOR. That is so exciting to hear. Would you talk about, just to clarify, whether the benefit would be tied to home value or household income? Just thinking about households that live in neighborhoods that have been heavily gentrified, maybe bought the home at a modest price, but now it's assessed very highly. And maybe household income is modest, or it's a fixed income retirement type of situation, exactly the folks that are having displacement pressures. Would you just talk about how a household in that situation would be impacted? Like, would they not benefit because it's tied to the house value versus their income, or is it income correlated? And then number one, and then just for my own understanding, I don't actually know how a property tax bill, what % of that is state tax versus local tax. And so I just would love to understand better how this being a state tax
Sure.
would affect like individual homeowner property taxes. Thank you.
So it would, Joy, be tied to the assessed value. That is something readily available and uniform across the state. Everyone, each county reports to the Department of Revenue the median, the values individually, but also a median value for that county. So it gives you a consistency across the state. It also calibrates it to the different home values in each county. For example, Garfield County. Garfield County's entire property tax roll is smaller than the property tax value we carry on the Columbia Tower. Think about that for a moment. One building in Seattle is taxed more than the entire county of Garfield. Now, that shows you kind of the scale that we're having to get to. The challenge with income is what do you use to qualify? And it'd be one thing if we frankly had an income tax, so that income number was readily available. But actually, we think, especially for the concern you voiced, and it's one I have shared as well about displacement, it would actually benefit those people that have watched their neighborhood gentrify. It'd be because it would tie their tax break to what's driving values up, so that they would reap the tax benefit, whereas in income, they might not get as much of a benefit. And also, again, hard to figure out how you would administer that absent having an income tax. So the notion we had here was, let's take some standard that is readily available to the Department of Revenue, that is calibrated by each county, so it is somewhat indexed, because obviously the median value of a house in King County is much different than the median value of that home in Garfield. And it also makes sure that, on the other hand, this is something that Executive Constantine and I worked on in that, is that everybody has some skin in the game this way. We'd initially looked at the notion of a dollar amount, but it would mean that some counties, frankly, their values were such that they wouldn't pay anything through K-12 education. And we thought that was wrong. So we're trying to make sure everybody's got skin in the game, but everybody gets some benefit. Does that kind of address what you're...
I'm just going to be honest, and maybe other people tracked and we can talk. I would love to talk with you offline. I didn't totally understand your point about like why this would be a benefit to someone who is modest income and has owned a home for a long time and
So
it's highly assessed. And I would love to just understand that better as this is being considered for a BHI priority.
The challenge for them is exactly as you described. They bought the house, and I've talked to numerous people, especially in Southeast Seattle, who, for example, bought a house back in the early 80s, maybe paid $40,000 for it. But that 1,200 square foot home has a view of Mount Rainier. Maybe not a great view, but a view of Mount Rainier. Now, because of market conditions, I carry it on my books because I have to set it at fair market value at $1.3 to $1.5 million. Their property taxes are way more than their mortgage probably ever was. What this does is says, we will adjust your property taxes so that it takes into consideration how your value has changed, even if your income has not changed. Because the problem is, and it's the challenge with the state uniformity clause of, can you, if you had an income tax, yeah, you could do an income tax calibrated to income, but again, that would mean you have to modify the uniformity clause to allow that. And to be honest with you, as much as I wish we would have an income tax in this state, I think it is one of the things that holds us back. I don't see that happening, certainly not in this upcoming session and not in any session soon. But I think this starts us down a path of re-examining the uniformity clause and creating a property tax system that is more fair and more equitable to all homeowners, but especially the kind of homeowner you're concerned about. And I'm happy to talk to you later in more detail. Anyone else?
Yes, Assessor Wilson, I have a question. So first of all, thank you for all of this. I think this is pretty interesting, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So I'm having the same boat that Joy is, where I'm just processing it, and I'm not a tax expert. So I was wondering, could you explain a little bit more of what the second element that's going to be modeled after the working families tax credit looks like, and how would that directly help propel or keep folks in to home ownership? Because I think I have it in my head, but I just want to make sure I'm clear about it.
Well, it's a little bit different than home ownership in that it's aimed at renters. The working family tax credit, what we would do is modify it so that renters in housing at a certain price point or that would get some kind of a credit that would offset some of the property tax increase that those commercial properties, those multifamily properties are getting. And what it's trying to do is make sure that that money goes directly to the tenant and isn't, taken by the landlord and just put in their pocket. So that's part of why we were looking at this. We had proposed a property tax exemption for the last 4 years on a slightly more modest approach, and frankly, we had language in it to direct it toward the renter, but we ran into some opposition in the legislature, and that wasn't going anywhere. So we think, given that the working family tax credit passed easily in both chambers, and that DOR already has the structure in place to calculate what a credit would be like, it gives us a tool where we're not having to invent the wheel all over again. And that does that, Cliff, kind of help clarify it for you a little bit?
Yeah, but I do have one slight follow-up question. So if I understand you correctly, so essentially you're going to be using the working families tax credit legislation that already passed as a springboard to be able to do this. And the DOR has the tools to be able to calculate what that would look like for renters and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe this is a very trite question, but like, how would it actually get to the renter? Like, what I'm thinking is that the renter, you know, pays their rent, and then, you know, the property owner would pay the property taxes on that. And would the DOR like mail checks back to the renters based on, you know, their income and the assessed value of that property, or you know, what would that look like?
It would be something like that, where it would be whether it is a check or how exactly you get it delivered, but it would go directly to the tenant rather than roll through the landlord and that. Then let me just quickly clip while I got you held hostage here, is that what we also hope, though, with the homeowner exemption is that, again, because it would lower the total cost of ownership of a home, it would disproportionately be of greater benefit for more modest size homes and sort of first time home buyers. We would hope that would make lending institutions loosen the purse strings a little bit, if you will, or otherwise allow people to, you know, stretch a little bit more because they're not having to pay as much in property taxes. So perhaps they could afford the 4-bedroom house rather than the 3-bedroom house, or get a little bigger yard or something like that. But, you know, the challenge you have right now for especially first-time home buyers is cost of down payment, cost of interest, a whole host of things, and then frankly the cost of property taxes. And so if we can do something to sort of lower that will help. So now someone asked, how did you decide on the 1.8 million as a marker? Well, that's for just King County, and it's based upon when you apply the formula of taking 60% off the median value of the house. And somebody asked, how much is the state share of property taxes? It's about between 43 and 45% of your property taxes are state taxes that go for K-12 education. The rest of it is local, and the local is a very complicated mix of senior and junior taxing districts. So you have to be careful that you not get into that and cause havoc for local governments. And clearly, one of the challenges that the county has right now is we don't have some of the revenue flexibility that cities have. So we're looking at budget cuts, including my office. But there is a tipping point for each county, and it again will be calibrated by each county. But in King County, basically, with that reduction on the state share, once you got above $1.8 million, you would actually progressively pay more in property taxes to make up for the tax break that we're giving more modest homes. Hopefully, Francesca, that helps answer your question.
I'm sure there are many questions in the room, Assessor Wilson, and we thank you so much for coming and letting us know about this work. It would be great for us to connect so that we can maybe get a one-pager that can just lay this out for people. You know, sometimes we start thinking through the percentages and the medians and all of the numbers, and, you know, it can be a little difficult. So it would be great to get a one-pager on the, you know, the version. I decided not to provide the group with the materials that I had before, because in the meeting I realized they were still evolving. So I didn't want to put anything out there that might not reflect the latest development, but it'd be great to have that.
We will put something together for you, Bambi, and share it. And obviously, for those on the call with us today, those who might be interested in supporting this, we'd love to have your help when we get it down to Olympia. We're going to, like Representative Berg talked about, we're going to try to get this pre-filed here within the next probably 6 to 8 weeks, and then hopefully come out of the chute fast when the legislature starts to meet again in January. So
sure. And then just one last question for you.
Sure.
So how is that working in terms of, you know, sponsorship and what you're thinking about as you move forward? You know, is this going to be a House? Is this going to be a Senate? Are you going to do both?
We'll do both, but we are likely to start the bill on the House side, and that's part of why I'm meeting with the Right Honorable April Berg here, I believe, next week. You know, we're lucky that we have a great relationship with Representative Berg. We've talked to her a bit about this before, and I'm frankly, I know she's not here right now. I feel kind of bad, but we're going to put the arm on her and see if we can get her to support this.
All right, well, just so everyone knows, we did not plan this. I didn't know you were going to say that. We did not have April Berg here today because Assessor Wilson was going to make that pitch to reinforce. So just all excited to see the work that's happening here. We're really hoping that this is moving forward in 2024. You know, we were sad to not see something occur in 2023. We were ready to go. So the more you can help us understand this in a clear way, let us see how this is truly going to affect Black homeownership, then that helps us as a group to be able to understand how we can advocate. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Take care, everybody.
All
Bye.
right. So we're moving a little quicker through the next group of people here, but luckily, you know, a lot of those are gave some extra time there. They're mostly kind of an update or a call to action. And so I think we're still going to get you all out of here by 11:30 and still have time to hear from you on the floor as well. But I'm going to quickly move over to Adria Buchanan of Fair Housing Center of Washington to tell us an update about the Covenant Homeownership Program study.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bambi. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Another part of the bill. I know.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. Okay, so my name is Adria Buchanan. I'm Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of Washington, and we are one of the subcontractors to the National Fair Housing Alliance that's working on the study. So I'm just going to jump right in, and I'll start with the timeline since you all have built the context for the Covenant Homeownership Act. So as far as the timeline, where we are right now is fall of 2023. So the Oversight Committee is still being developed, and I'm sure you all saw that email in regard to the Oversight Committee needing additional applicants. So I just want to put a plug for that. The research is still continuing, and so what I'd like to do in this presentation is just talk about the stakeholder engagement piece of it. So in terms of our overall goals, we want to be able to synthesize the resident narratives that are reflected in reports, studies, previous surveys, and public testimony. We want to be able to use that qualitative data to address any gaps, to humanize the quantitative data, and for the recommendations to really, I think, emphasize the real life implications of the program. So that is what the stories and the call to action later, that's really what it's about. It's about really just addressing gaps. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to, replace all the work that you've been doing. You've built a lot of trust with your stakeholders, and so we're not trying to come in and disrupt that. But we do want to be able to leverage the stories that have already been shared and to use what people are willing to give us at this point to address any gaps and to make sure that if there's anything that hasn't been reflected in the reports, the studies, the previous surveys, all the hours of public testimony, if there are things that haven't been, brought up in those ways, then we want to be able to do that here. In terms of what we've done so far, we've looked at more than 130 documents, including books, reports, news articles, academic publications, research studies, and ordinances. And so I wanted to share that with you because some of you who were in the update meeting last month we hadn't yet gotten to chapter 2. We were still, chapter 1, we were still drafting chapter 1. And so that's still, being finalized and reviewed, but I wanted to come back and share some of what we've been able to look at. And this is a very rough categorization of some of the documents that we've been looking at. So categorized in terms of land and territory. So looking at tribal lands, settlement efforts. Washington long ago used to be part of Oregon. And so looking at the impact of that, as well as other types of exclusion laws that are regional. In terms of specific exclusion, looking at the Chinese Exclusion Act, looking at Japanese American life, impacts after World War II, things like that. The GI Bill, mapping, we all know about redlining and different inequality and wealth loss that's been mapped over the years. And so really looking at that in greater context, but then also looking at it specific to Washington. In terms of lending, there are several articles that have been written both about Washington in general, but also in terms of the industry. So FHA underwriting manual from 1938, things like the Federal Reserve Bank's practices, even documents that the Housing Finance Commission has published. There's, again, this is a snapshot. So you all know there's a ton of information available about housing and population. Yakima as being a growing municipality, the eviction lab that several municipalities within Washington were a part of, including the city of Tacoma. Other, white supremacy and alien land laws, as well as looking at the eastern part of the state. And then finally, really trying to make sure we're getting a representative sample of what's going on throughout the state of Washington. So just tried to pull as an example where we've been looking at different places. So Hanford, King County, like I said, Spokane, things about Tri-Cities, just to give you some information there. In terms of the actual engagement, I wanted to provide an update on what we've done to date. So we've done several key informant interviews. We've held listening sessions. We've had community forums. There's also an online survey that's available. We've developed a website where you can sign up for updates, and I'll share the link to that in a little bit. And we are actively reviewing the Covenant Act public testimony. So there's hours of testimony and pages of transcripts. So we're going through those. And then we were also at the Housing Washington conference last week. As far as what's been added as a result of feedback from you all and feedback that we've gotten from other stakeholders in this work, we now have greater flexibility to be able to engage in one-on-one and do more small group presentations. And so, for Latino and senior and faith-based communities, if you have contacts there, I know some of you have given us contacts already, but for the rest of you on this call, if you have contacts that you think would be helpful for us to, again, cover gaps that might not be represented in the narratives that are already available, that would be helpful. We've also added informational sessions, and there will be a recording available online, hopefully in the next couple of days. That is, it's a 10-minute presentation of what we've shared with a lot of you, but it will be available for public consumption. So anybody can just go online and hear a brief update and get the context that you all already have. We are also adding an additional listening session in Spanish and an additional community forum, and we will be running Facebook ads. And then I know some of you, I believe Cliff and others talked about exploring some media outlets. And so we're working to figure out how best to do that. Okay, so in terms of what we're looking for, community input and insight is really important in this stage. Again, it's, we're not trying to gather everything under the sun, but we're really just trying to like spot check and make sure that we haven't missed anything. And so if people have insight on the lasting impacts of specific discrimination that occurred against marginalized groups, including their family members through restrictive covenants, the lending of credit, or other barriers to home ownership, or if anyone was displaced because of eminent domain, highway projects, urban renewal programs, model cities programs, or other similar programs, those would be things that we would want to know more about. And again, the objective is really to inform and document whether and to what extent such discrimination continues today. So, the literature, the articles, everything is helping to better articulate what the environment was and potentially is. And so the stories help give color to that. And then in terms of how you can get involved or stay involved is really, again, if you have stories, we know that many people, their parents, grandparents, relatives, friends, neighbors, or others have experienced housing discrimination that may not have been reported or otherwise documented. I know just in talking to folks, people will say, oh yeah, my aunt owns a house, or, my cousin inherited her property, or, back in the day, my grandma owned 3 houses, and so it is important. And in that reflection, they're wondering, oh, well, how was it that my grandma was able to obtain that house? Or did she have any difficulty? And so really thinking about what information we have access to in our immediate network, just within our families and our friends, and then thinking more broadly about other individuals that you might know who may have experienced discrimination. You can sign up for updates. So again, I'll put these links in the chat, but there is a National Fair Housing Alliance website that hosts all the information and presents a really clear picture of what the study is about, the timeline, and ways to get involved. And then if you'd like us to speak, so again, just doing something like this, if it could be for your employer, it could be for a community group that you're a part of, we're happy to just come in and give, some more context, because you all are BHI, so you are well aware of the Covenant Homeownership Act. But for folks who aren't as aware, we have a different presentation that gives more context. And really just, we want to be able to share the information, not just to solicit input if people have stories, but to make sure that people who could potentially be eligible for this program also know that it exists. So if you want us to speak to any group that you think might be interested, feel free to email me or Marley. She's located in Spokane, but if things are happening virtually, she can certainly be part of those conversations. And really just to share the information with your networks. BHI is a large consortium, and I know that you all have built relationships, and this is really just continuing the work that you already have laid the foundation for. And so we again don't want to create anything new, but we want to be able to, again, spot check, do a final kind of check off to make sure that we haven't missed anything, and that we're able to articulate the experiences of people and the environment that they've been operating in, to make sure that whatever recommendations are made really capture the full extent of the discrimination that occurred, and individuals who would most benefit from the program.
Thank you so much for that, Adria. And feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions. I will be sure to make sure that you have all of these links and contacts as well. And then just reminding you that the study is occurring and must be turned in by March 1st of 2024. So these are things happening in very quick real time. So if you want to be a contributor, it's better now than later. Thanks so much for that, and we'll keep you informed. We're going to move right over to Ryan so that we make sure that we can hear a little bit about this new idea around affordable homes construction sales tax exemption. And Ryan, I apologize in advance. You're going to have a lot less time. We're kind of hitting towards our end here.
No worries. I will do my best to be as fast as possible. So Hi, everyone. I'm sure everyone probably knows me, but for those who don't, my name is Ryan Donohue. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer over at Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King, and Kittitas counties. I am here to talk a little bit about something that we've been working on, basically creating a sales and use tax break for affordable homeownership projects. And actually, before I do that, I just want to kind of highlight over here, we have, you can't really tell, but Evelyn, who used to work for us at Habitat at the time when this was going on, she now I think is over at the hotline, helping with them, also working on BHI stuff. So this was actually at one of our home dedications. This was, I think, Lake City, if I remember correctly. That guy was. This is maybe one of my favorite pictures we've ever had. But what I wanted to start off with is talking about what the problem is. We all already know about it, but interest rates are incredibly high. It's incredibly difficult for people to be able to get mortgages across the board. And what that does, it hurts everybody, but it particularly hurts those who are building affordable homeownership projects, as everyone here knows, because ultimately we can't go down, or at least we don't think, we can go down on the actual amount of dollars we're spending. So we need to find a way to try and be able to address that problem, that interest rate problem. Ultimately, higher interest rates leading to lower buying power for our home buyers, which is, means that we as affordable homeownership providers have to shoulder more of the burden, meaning we build less homes and serve less families. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, higher interest rates hits Black families even harder, in particular, because it's already disproportionately harder for a Black family to get a mortgage in the first place, much less one that has a higher interest rate on top of that. And then with increased materials cost, we have a number of different problems. It's not as high as it used to be, obviously, but our input costs continue to be higher. The other thing I would note as far as another kind of problem involved in this is that we're going into a short legislative session. And while I don't mean to throw cold water on anybody's hopes and dreams, and I know that I'm really excited about the possibility of what we potentially could be able to do with, whether it's the capital budget, whether it's any of the number of asks that we have that we're going to be involved in, and that we at Habitat will be strongly supporting. We do have a little bit of a concern, just because big asks in a short session are really hard to get across. So, politically speaking, we got to keep that in mind, which is why one of the things that we've been thinking about is kind of reviving an old idea that came about back in 2019, and I imagine it had been brought up before that as well. But the idea of creating a temporary, again, just temporary, 5 years, sales and use tax exemption for affordable homeownership projects. This is a way that we'll be able to lower the cost that we all have to shoulder when we're building, that doesn't have a substantial impact on the state, but will allow for us to be able to make a substantial impact on who we're serving, how we're serving, and the amount of money that we're going to end up having to spend, right? It is a temporary solution, we hope, a temporary solution to a hopefully temporary problem. That's why we're specifically saying 5 years. If we're able to go out farther, certainly I would not object to it. I think you start off, politically speaking, you start off with 5 years and you see if we can get farther down the line. Another thing I think to note is that it will help keep costs down as far as costs to the state down, because again, it is it's only for affordable home ownership, very specifically, and it's also for only for 5 years. So those are different ways that we'll be able to help keep the costs down. An example that I have to point to is actually a bill 1168, which was from 2019. Now that bill did pass, but the sales and use tax part got stripped out, as well as the fact that that bill itself specifically only was for self-help home ownership. This bill would be more home ownership, would be much wider, obviously helping more than just Habitat affiliates. The intention is to do something that is helpful for all of affordable home ownership here. So it's a larger eligibility, but also doesn't do as much. That bill had a cost of roughly $1 million a year to the state over 5 years. Local impact would have been probably less than $250,000 a year. Now, obviously, that impact is going to be higher now than it would have been then, but not drastically higher probably. The other thing I'll note is this actually simply extends an existing precedent that already is there. There's already a sales and use tax break if we were building emergency shelters for homelessness, if we were building alternative housing for youth in crisis. We would already have this exemption, but because we do affordable home ownership, we don't have this exemption, right? There are also a number of other kind of random examples of sales and use tax exemptions that exist, including vessels 30 feet or longer being sold to non-residents. So congratulations, Jeff Bezos. You don't have to pay tax on a build on something that you do, though I guess he's a resident, right? The sale of bullion and gold and other precious metals, and the sale of coal used to generate electric power. All of that is tax-free, basically. There's no reason why, when we're in the middle of a housing crisis and we desperately need more housing, that we can't take a relatively simple approach that won't cost the state a lot of money, but will have a significant impact on affordable housing, or at least on affordable home ownership in particular, that we should be addressing. So that, again, like I said, I'm going to try and do this very quickly. That's the short version. Hopefully this, would be curious to see what questions anybody has.
We are heading towards the end of the hour here. The only thing I saw is just, really thinking through the definition of affordable home ownership to understand where this impact might be and who's included in the idea.
Yeah. In the conversations that I've had so far, one of the things that I've stressed repeatedly is that we need as broad as we can with the definition of affordable home ownership, while also trying to not increase the cost to the state too much. I'm actually working with a representative to try and figure out what the actual cost would be based on a couple of different examples. But I think where we're going to end up landing, just being perfectly honest, is probably looking at permanently affordable home ownership using the MFTE definition, as well as self-help housing. So, that would also qualify an additional more. Now, how many organizations are doing home ownership, affordable home ownership, that don't qualify as either or both of those? Not sure. Probably not very many. But that's going to be something we're kind of playing around with as well, trying to figure out.
All right, and we'll look for an update, where we are right now in terms of some of these ideas that are state level, right, where people are still in the planning stages. So there's still a lot of conversation and a lot of these ideas are evolving. And so we will make sure to keep you all informed. And thank you so much, Ryan, for letting us know about this idea. And, obviously in a room here where we're talking about home ownership, right up our alley and exciting to hear about. We have just a minute or two before we're going to leave this room together. And I'm sorry, we're not going to have time for updates from individuals. We ate up a little bit of that time in some of our Q&A, but I think we really needed to hear a little bit more of that Q&A in some of our questions today that we had from our presenters. But we do have Chad Vaculin here, who's going to close us out today, letting us know about an opportunity around the Seattle levy for partnership and to make sure that we're amplifying this. Remember that we are in October. You're going to be receiving your ballots very, very soon. And levy needs to be on the top of people's minds if this is going to make sure to pass. And over to you, Chad.
Thanks, Bambi. Ballots are going to be in your mailboxes in about a week. You need to get those in by November 7th. And, we're really on the precipice of passing a historical investment in affordable housing and affordable home ownership through this levy. It includes $51 million for affordable home ownership. So right at this last month or so, we really want to double down and try to engage as many voters as we can, particularly those that, have historically not been exposed to information regarding the housing levy and its importance. So HTC is partnering with community-based and community-facing organizations to really connect with their networks and their communities to ensure that that there's just an understanding of the levy's significance and really encouraging support. We do have a little bit of funding and resources to support organizations to connect with their communities and their networks. We really want to partner with you, and we know that the individual organizations know the best way to connect with their communities. So we really want to make it as kind of just leave it up to the organization of the best ways to connect with their communities. Just a couple of examples to what that could look like and what others have done. So communications, so social media, newsletters, email blasts. We have a bunch of like social media toolkits and blurbs and things like that to help support with those efforts. Hosting phone banks. So this would really consist of, recruiting volunteers within your networks to connect directly with voters. The campaign and others would supply all the needed materials like call lists, training, brief training, like scripts, things like that. But we need bodies and people that are willing to connect with voters. So I know Habitat's been a shining star in this effort, and them and other organizations are really kind of looking for others to team up with for these upcoming events. It could also be like door knocking or tabling at community events, like at a farmer's market or any other kind of community event, just to kind of engage with folks that are attending those events. We want to get creative, so that could be sign waving or voter registration, get out the vote efforts, anything like that. We really want to partner with organizations. So I'm going to put my information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me, and we can kind of I can give you an overview a little bit more and really get this going. So really looking forward for more organizations to jump in on this, and looking forward to partnering with you all and to get this levy passed on November 7th. So thank you for that. Back to you, Ben.
And thanks so much for that, Chad. And then Cliff did go ahead and put in the phone bank for the levy tonight. There's a link if you want to get involved, make your Wednesday night a lot more exciting, connect with people around the levy and connect with those other advocates in the room. Thank you all for hanging on. Sorry, we're a few minutes over from the half of the hour. I will be sending out information about our November 8 meeting, and we will see you on November 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you.